Shrapnel tore through our convoy outside Kabul, leaving me permanently branded with jagged, angry scars. Coming home was supposed to bring peace, but the true ambush waited at our family dinner. When an arrogant uncle mocked my sacrifice, he had no idea who was about to crash his party. Gravel crunched beneath the tires of my father's aging sedan as we rolled up the serpentine driveway of Uncle Ahern's Connecticut estate. For the last 6 months, my reality had been defined by the sterile, bleach-scented walls of Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, and before that, the suffocating heat and relentless tension of the Arghandab River Valley. Now, staring through the passenger window at the sprawling, immaculately manicured lawns and the towering colonial pillars of the Wallace family compound, I felt like a ghost haunting a world I no longer belonged to. "You don't have to do this, Scarlett, my father Robert," said softly, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles white. He was a good man, a high school history teacher who had spent his entire life living in the overwhelming shadow of his older, obscenely wealthy brother. "I'm fine, Dad," I replied, though the tightness in my jaw betrayed me. Reaching up, I instinctively brushed my fingertips against the left side of my neck. The skin there was no longer smooth. It was a rugged terrain of raised pink and purple keloid scars that snaked up from my collarbone, disappearing just behind my ear. More extensive scarring covered my left shoulder and arm, the permanent receipts of an IED blast that had ripped through my command vehicle, taking the life of my driver, Corporal Jenkins, and nearly ending mine. I had chosen to wear a simple, charcoal gray wrap dress today. It was elegant, but it featured a V-neck and short sleeves. I had spent months hiding under bandages and oversized hospital gowns. I was done hiding. I had earned these marks in the dust and blood of a foreign land, pulling 2 of my soldiers from a burning wreck before my own body gave out. We parked behind a line of luxury SUVs, the kind that had never seen a speck of mud. As we walked toward the heavy oak front doors, a cold November breeze bit at my healing skin, sending a dull ache radiating through my nerve endings. The door swung open before we even knocked, revealing Aunt Beatrice holding a crystal glass of champagne. She was a woman constructed entirely of expensive filler, designer fabrics, and hollow pleasantries. "Robert, you made it!" she chimed, offering my father an air kiss. Then, her eyes shifted to me. I watched the microscopic recalibration of her facial muscles as her gaze snagged on my neck and arm. A flash of undeniable revulsion flared in her eyes before being buried under a thick layer of forced pity. And Scarlett, "Oh, honey, we've been praying for you." "Thank you, Aunt Beatrice," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the exhaustion settling deep in my bones. Come in, come in." She ushered us into the grand foyer, where the scent of roasting turkey waged war with the overwhelming aroma of expensive floral arrangements. "Everyone is in the formal living room." Ahern just opened a vintage Bordeaux. Walking into that living room felt remarkably similar to stepping into a hostile briefing room. Dozens of relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, and various hangers-on who orbited Ahern's wealth were scattered across velvet sofas and antique armchairs. The low hum of their chatter died out the moment I stepped into the light. Eyes darted toward me, snagged on my ruined skin, and quickly darted away. It was a synchronized dance of upper-class avoidance. Then, the sea of cashmere and silk parted, and Uncle Ahern emerged. Ahern Wallace was a man who commanded a room not through charisma, but through the sheer brute force of his checkbook. He was a corporate raider, a billionaire who spent his days dismantling companies and his nights holding court among politicians and socialites. He wore a tailored navy suit that cost more than a specialist's annual salary, and his smile was as sharp as a scalpel. "Ah, the conquering hero returns," Ahern boomed, extending a hand. He didn't pull me into a hug. He kept me at arm's length, literally and metaphorically. "Hello, Uncle Ahern," I said, shaking his hand firmly. I noticed his eyes immediately drop to my left arm. He didn't try to hide his stare like the others. He examined my scars with the critical, displeased expression of a man inspecting a damaged piece of merchandise. "We were beginning to wonder if the army was ever going to let you go," Ahern continued, swirling the dark red wine in his glass. "Though, looking at you, it seems they didn't have much of a choice. You're a bit worse for wear." aren't you?" "I survived," I replied evenly, refusing to break eye contact. "Yes, well," Ahern sighed, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "I always told your father that sending a Wallace girl off to play in the mud with the grunts was a terrible miscalculation. You had a spot waiting for you at Columbia Law. You could have been sitting in a corner office by now, completely intact. Instead, you're back here, wearing—" He waved a dismissive hand toward my scars. "The consequences of your rebellion." My father stepped forward, his voice wavering slightly. "Ahern, please. She just got home. She's a captain now. She received a Purple Heart." "A metal trinket for failing to dodge a bomb, Robert," Ahern shot back, his tone laced with venomous condescension. "In the corporate world, we don't hand out awards for getting blown up. We hand out pink slips." The room grew suffocatingly quiet. My cousin, Chloe, Ahern's daughter, nervously sipped her drink, looking anywhere but at me. The sheer audacity of his ignorance was staggering. But I had faced down warlords who commanded literal armies. I wasn't about to break down in front of a man whose toughest battle was a boardroom proxy fight. "The military isn't a hedge fund, Ahern," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "We don't abandon our people when the margins get tight. And these marks," I gestured to my own arm, "are a reminder that I brought my men home alive. I consider that a successful quarter." A murmur rippled through the room. Nobody spoke to Ahern that way. For a second, a flash of genuine anger tightened his jaw, but he quickly masked it with a patronizing chuckle. "Spoken like a true foot soldier," Ahern sneered. "Let's just hope your combat pay covered a good plastic surgeon. Dinner is in 20 minutes, everyone." As the crowd dispersed, returning to their hushed, gossipy conversations, I felt my father's hand on my uninjured shoulder. "I'm sorry, Scarlett," he whispered. "You know how he is. Just try to keep the peace." For me, I looked at my father, seeing the years of submission etched into the lines around his eyes. I loved him, but I realized in that moment that surviving the war was only half the battle. Surviving my family was going to require a completely different kind of armor. The dining room table was a staggering display of excess, stretching 20 feet across the room. It was loaded with sterling silver, crystal goblets, and enough gourmet food to feed my entire platoon for a week. I was seated near the middle, directly across from my cousin Preston, who had spent the entire appetizer course complaining about how the Wi-Fi on his father's yacht had been spotty during their trip to Monaco. At the head of the table sat Ahern, presiding over the feast like a feudal lord. As the main courses were cleared and the heavy, crystal decanters of scotch were brought out, Ahern began his favorite ritual, holding court. "It was a bloodbath," Ahern declared loudly, capturing the attention of the entire table. He was detailing his recent acquisition of a rival logistics company. "They thought they could outmaneuver me with a poison pill defense. Idiots. I brought in my legal team and we completely gutted their executive board, slashed their pensions, liquidated their assets. It was total warfare. You have to be ruthless. You have to be a predator." He paused, taking a self-satisfied sip of his scotch, his eyes scanning the table for the admiration he demanded. His gaze stopped abruptly on me. "Of course, Scarlett here knows all about warfare, don't you?" Ahern said, his voice dripping with faux innocence. "Though, I suppose my kind of battles require a bit more strategic intellect than kicking down doors in the desert." The silverware clinking against china slowly ceased. The tension in the room spiked, thick and suffocating. "They are different environments, Uncle Ahern," I replied, carefully keeping my tone neutral. I focused on the intricate pattern of the lace tablecloth, trying to suppress the memories of actual bloodbaths that his casual use of the word had triggered in my mind. "Different? I'll say," Ahern scoffed, leaning forward, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. "In my world, when you make a mistake, you lose capital. In your world, when you make a mistake, you come home looking like a patchwork quilt." My father dropped his fork. It hit his plate with a sharp clatter. "Ahern, that is enough," he said, his voice trembling but louder than I had heard it in years. "Oh, relax, Robert," Ahern snapped, waving him off. "I'm just speaking the truth. We're all thinking it. It's a tragedy. Look at her. She used to be a beautiful girl. Now, She parades around in a dress, showing off those hideous, mangled scars, as if we're supposed to applaud her for her own incompetence. It's unsightly. It's embarrassing to sit across from. The cruelty in his words wasn't just casual, it was calculated. He wanted to break me. He wanted to remind me that in his house, under his roof, my rank and my survival meant nothing compared to his aesthetic standards. I slowly placed my linen napkin on the table. My heart was pounding a familiar rhythm against my ribs, the same heavy, adrenaline-fueled thud that preceded a firefight. Embarrassing? I repeated, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the distinct, authoritative edge I used to command my troops. You think my scars embarrass you, Ahern? I think they are the physical manifestation of a wasted life and a series of poor choices, Ahern stated bluntly, crossing his arms. In fact, since we're being honest here, I was going to wait until after the holidays, but I suppose now is as good a time as any. I've taken steps to rectify this situation. I frowned, a cold sense of dread creeping up my spine. What steps? Ahern smiled, a terrifyingly smug expression. I played golf last week with General Hastings at the country club. We're old friends. I explained to him that my niece has suffered a traumatic, disfiguring injury that clearly renders her mentally and physically unfit for continued service. I told him that out of respect for the Wallace family name, we need this handled quietly. The room spun. My breath caught in my throat. You did what? I initiated a back-channel medical discharge for you, Scarlett, Ahern announced proudly, looking around the table as if he had just announced a massive charitable donation. With my influence, they are going to expedite your paperwork. You'll be quietly separated from the army by January. I even arranged for a severance package to cover your cosmetic surgeries. You can stay at the guest house here until you're presentable enough to get a desk job at one of my subsidiaries. He hadn't just insulted my appearance. He had actively reached into my military career, the career I had bled for, the career I had watched my friends die for, and tried to crush it to protect his precious family image. He viewed my service as an embarrassing hobby that he could just cancel with a phone call to his country club buddies. You have no authority, I seethed, the anger finally breaking through my carefully constructed dam. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I towered over the table, my posture rigid, the scars on my neck flushing a deep, furious crimson. I am a commissioned officer in the United States Army. I report to my battalion commander, not to a cowardly corporate tyrant who thinks a golf course is a battlefield. Sit down, young lady, Ahern bellowed, slamming his fist on the table, rattling the crystal. I am trying to save you from yourself. I am trying to save this family from having to look at your mutilated arm every Thanksgiving and pretend we aren't horrified. Scarlett, please, my mother, quiet until now, whispered tearfully from down the table. I looked at my parents. My father was staring at his lap, thoroughly defeated by his brother once again. My mother was silently crying. I realized then that I could never win a war in this house, because the people I was trying to protect were already prisoners of war, fully surrendered to Ahern's wealth and cruelty. I don't need your salvation, Ahern, I said, my voice eerily calm now, slicing through the heavy silence of the dining room. And I certainly don't need your money to fix what isn't broken. These scars save the lives of two men who have more courage in their little fingers than you have in your entire bloated, pathetic existence. I stepped away from the table, my eyes locking onto his one last time. You tried to go behind my back and strip me of my uniform because my survival offends your delicate sensibilities. You will find out very soon, Ahern, that the United States military doesn't answer to you. And neither do I. Without another word, I turned on my heel and marched out of the dining room. I didn't stop in the foyer for my coat. I threw open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the freezing November night. The cold air hit my face like a shockwave, clearing the suffocating stench of Ahern's expensive cologne from my lungs. I began the long, dark walk down the serpentine driveway, leaving the gilded cage and the man who thought he could buy my honor far behind me in the rearview mirror of my life. I didn't know how I was going to fight a 2-star general and a billionaire uncle, But as the frozen gravel crunched under my boots, I knew one thing for certain. I had survived the ambush. Now, it was time to plan the counterattack. Cold wind whipped against my face as the headlights of a taxi finally pierced the darkness of the rural highway. Stepping into the warm cab, I instructed the driver to take me to the nearest cheap motel. Sleep was impossible that night. Instead of resting, I opened my laptop on the rickety desk and began drafting emails. Ahern thought he could treat the United States military like a hostile corporate takeover. He believed a few rounds of golf and a whispered conversation with a retired two-star general could erase my career. He severely underestimated the brotherhood of the uniform. By dawn, I was on a train headed straight for Washington, D.C. 3 days later, I stood at attention inside a remarkably austere office at the Pentagon. Seated behind the heavy oak desk was Lieutenant General Thomas Davies, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. He was a man carved from granite, with a chest full of ribbons that told a story of decades spent in the trenches. He had been my commanding officer's mentor, and he possessed a legendary disdain for civilian interference in military affairs. "At ease, Captain Wallace," General Davies rumbled, gesturing to a leather chair. He picked up a thick manila folder resting on his desk. "I received the inquiry from General Hastings regarding your medical fitness and potential discharge. It seems Hastings has been doing favors for a billionaire friend." "Sir, I am fully prepared to appeal any medical board decision," I stated firmly, keeping my posture rigid. "I have clearance from my physical therapists. My scars are severe, but they do not inhibit my range of motion or my tactical capability. I am fighting to stay in." General Davies let out a sound that was half laugh, half growl. "Relax, Captain. You aren't going anywhere." In fact, Hastings' little back-channel stunt triggered an automatic review of your file by the Inspector General's office to ensure no undue influence was being exerted. When they pulled your after-action reports from the Arghandab Valley, they found a massive discrepancy. I blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "A discrepancy, sir?" "The commendation you received, the Purple Heart and the Standard Bronze Star, was rushed through the pipeline by a lower command desk trying to clear paperwork during a chaotic rotation," Davies explained. Leaning forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "They completely overlooked the sworn testimonies of the 2 men you pulled from that burning Humvee. One of those men, Specialist Miller, lost both his legs. The other, Sergeant First Class O'Connor, had a severed artery. You maintained suppressive fire while dragging them 60 yards through an active kill zone, taking shrapnel to your neck and arm in the process. You didn't just survive an ambush, Captain. You broke the enemy's flanking maneuver and saved 2 American lives at the direct risk of your own." He closed the folder and slapped his palm flat against it. "General Hastings has been politely advised to enjoy his retirement and stop playing golf with arrogant civilians. Your uncle's attempt to bury you just put a massive spotlight on your file, Scarlett. The Secretary of Defense personally reviewed the updated investigation yesterday. Your Bronze Star is being upgraded." A lump formed in my throat, thick and heavy. The sleepless nights, the phantom pains, the excruciating humiliation at Ahern's dining table, all of it seemed to crystallize into this single, blinding moment of vindication. "Upgraded to what, sir?" "You'll find out soon enough," Davies said, with a rare, fleeting smile. "Now, I understand your uncle, Ahern Wallace, hosts a massive philanthropic gala in New York every December. High society, press, politicians, a real circus. The Department of Defense has been looking for a suitable venue to highlight the extraordinary sacrifices of our wounded warriors to the civilian sector." Realization dawned on me, and a slow, fierce satisfaction began to replace the cold dread that had gripped me for days. "You want to use his gala." Let's just say his public relations team was absolutely thrilled when the Pentagon reached out and offered to have a senior cabinet member make a surprise appearance to honor a local hero, Davies noted, his eyes gleaming with tactical mischief. "Ahern thinks the military is coming to polish his halo. He doesn't know the hero is you. You have your orders, Captain. Dress blues. December 15th. Do not be late." Brilliant chandeliers cast a golden, shimmering light over the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria. The Wallace Foundation Winter Gala was the crown jewel of Ahern's social calendar, an ostentatious display of wealth disguised as charity. 1,000 of the most powerful people on the eastern seaboard were gathered, sipping $1,000 champagne and rubbing shoulders with senators and media moguls. I arrived precisely at 8 o'clock. I wore my Army service uniform, the dark blue fabric immaculate, the gold buttons polished to a mirror shine. My hair was pulled back into a tight regulation bun, leaving the angry, jagged scars on my neck and shoulder completely exposed. I wasn't hiding anymore. I walked through the towering double doors, the sharp click-clack of my dress shoes cutting through the soft orchestral music playing in the background. Whispers erupted almost instantly. Heads turned. I saw Aunt Beatrice drop her crystal glass. It shattered against the marble floor, completely ignored. Across the room, holding court near the main stage, was Uncle Ahern. He wore a custom tuxedo, beaming as flashbulbs went off around him. Then, the sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits parted, and he saw me. The color completely drained from Ahern's face. He looked like a man who had just watched his most secure stock portfolio plummet to zero. He quickly muttered something to his sycophants and aggressively shoved his way through the crowd toward me, his eyes wide with a mixture of panic and fury. "What in the hell are you doing here?" Ahern hissed, grabbing my uninjured arm, trying to pull me toward a side exit. "I told you to stay out of sight. Hastings assured me your discharge was being processed. Are you trying to humiliate me in front of the governor?" I effortlessly twisted my arm out of his grasp, my expression hardened into stone. "Take your hands off me, Ahern. You aren't in charge of my deployment." "Security!" Ahern frantically signaled to a large man in a suit nearby. "Get her out of here before the VIP guest arrives." "I am the VIP guest, Ahern," I replied, my voice steady and cold. Before Ahern could process the impossibility of my statement, the orchestral music abruptly stopped. A deep, authoritative voice echoed over the ballroom's massive sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the main stage. It is my profound honor to introduce the Secretary of Defense of the United States of America, the Honorable Richard Hayes." The crowd erupted into deafening applause. Ahern froze, his jaw practically unhinged. He turned slowly toward the stage, where the Secretary of Defense, flanked by a Joint Service color guard, stepped up to the podium. Secretary Hayes was a towering figure of authority, projecting a gravity that made Ahern's corporate bravado look like a cheap parlor trick. "Thank you," Secretary Hayes began, his voice resonating through the hushed ballroom. "We gather tonight in a room built by immense wealth, but true wealth, the kind that secures the very freedom allowing this prosperity to exist, is not measured in bank accounts or corporate acquisitions. It is measured in blood. It is measured in the unbreakable will of the men and women who step into the fire so that we may sleep in peace." Hayes scanned the room, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. "Recently, it came to my attention that some within civilian circles view the physical tolls of war, the scars, the wounds, the permanent marks of battle as something distasteful, something to be hidden away out of embarrassment." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I watched Ahern visibly shrink, his tailored tuxedo suddenly looking 2 sizes too big. He began to sweat, the arrogant smirk completely erased from his face. "Let me be unequivocally clear," the secretary's voice boomed, rattling the crystal glasses on the tables. "There is no corporate boardroom, no hedge fund, and no billionaire's estate that commands more respect than a single drop of blood shed by an American soldier. Tonight, we are not here to celebrate corporate charity. We are here to rectify an oversight and to honor a warrior who exemplifies the absolute pinnacle of human courage." Secretary Hayes looked directly at me, standing near the back of the room. "Captain Scarlett Wallace, please come forward." The ballroom descended into stunned silence. I stepped out from the shadows of the crowd. The pathway to the stage cleared instantly. The billionaires, the politicians, the socialites, they all stepped back, their eyes locked on the scars I proudly wore on my neck. I marched down the center aisle, my head held high, every step a deliberate strike against the man who had tried to erase me. As I passed Ahern, I didn't even look at him. He was completely paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare of his own making, exposed in front of the very society he ruled. I reached the stage and rendered a crisp, sharp salute to the Secretary of Defense. He returned it with utmost respect. "Captain Wallace," Secretary Hayes said softly, stepping away from the microphone. An aide approached, carrying a velvet box. "For extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy. For dragging 2 critically wounded soldiers to safety while under heavy machine gun fire, sustaining severe wounds in the process, and refusing medical evacuation until your men were secured. The President of the United States takes great pleasure in presenting you with the Distinguished Service Cross." The crowd stood in absolute awe. The secretary pinned the heavy, gleaming cross to my uniform, right above my ribbons. He stepped back and saluted me once more. When I turned to face the room, the applause started. It wasn't the polite, golf clap applause of high society. It was a roaring, thunderous standing ovation that shook the very foundations of the ballroom. Flashes blinded me as the press documented the moment. Through the sea of cheering faces, my eyes found my father. He was standing a few feet away from Ahern. For the first time in his life, my father was not looking at his brother with deference. He was looking at him with profound pity. My father squared his shoulders, turned his back on Ahern, and walked down the aisle toward the stage, his face streaming with proud tears. Ahern Wallace stood completely alone in a room of 1,000 people. His money, his influence, and his power had been utterly neutralized by a force he could never comprehend: honor. He had tried to hide my scars in shame. Instead, the entire world was watching as the highest military authority in the land declared them to be the most beautiful, valuable things in the room. I walked off that stage not as a broken soldier, but as a conqueror. The gilded cage was shattered, the ghost was banished, and the war for my soul was finally won. Did Captain Wallace's incredible triumph over her arrogant uncle leave you cheering? True heroes wear their scars with pride, and no amount of money can buy the honor she earned on the battlefield. If this story of resilience, justice, and family drama resonated with you, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping real-life stories. Drop a comment down below to honor all our brave military veterans.